Welcome to the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Since 2010, the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska has worked toward one goal, a food and water secure world. One in which global food security is ensured without compromising the use of water to meet other essential human and environmental needs. It's a daunting vision, but one that is vitally important. This podcast amplifies the voices of those making waves in this space. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hello, and welcome back to the Water for Food podcast. My name is Renata Rimshaite, and I'm a Senior Program Manager at the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute, and your guest host for this podcast. Today we're talking about groundwater. When it comes to groundwater management, California was the Wild West not long ago, with unrestricted pumping depleting many aquifers. But that changed in 2014 with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which created about 350 Groundwater Sustainability Agencies responsible for managing more than 140 of the state's basins. Using a framework of local control, Groundwater Sustainability Agencies work to sustain groundwater resources for growers, industries, residents, and ecosystems. Joining me today to discuss this topic is Matt Beeman, Groundwater Regulatory Manager with the Merced Irrigation Urban Groundwater Sustainability Agency in California, along with Jim Schneider from the Water Resources team at Olson. Olson delivers a full range of engineering and design services to improve infrastructure and strengthen communities. Founded 70 years ago in Nebraska, Olson works on projects across the country, including in water planning. So Matt and Jim, thank you both for participating in our discussion today.
Thank you.
I'd like to start our discussion off by learning more context about California's Merced subbasin, the importance of groundwater resources in that region, as well as the conditions that the local Groundwater Sustainability Agency is seeking to address. So Matt, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your work with the Merced Irrigation Urban Groundwater Sustainability Agency.
Well, thank you for having us. So when the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was established, it gave flexibility in providing for local control. The option was, well, really, this is the first time, like you said, in California that groundwater has ever been regulated from a quantity standpoint, especially. And one of the key pieces of it was allowing for local control and local input for managing groundwater resources. So with that came a lot of options, which makes it a little bit complex. But in the Merced Groundwater Subbasin, we opted, there were 3 groundwater sustainability agencies that were formed, and we all collaborated together on one plan on how to manage the groundwater resources. The Merced Irrigation Urban Groundwater Sustainability Agency is one of those GSAs. We have 7 member agencies. It includes both municipal water suppliers and an irrigation district. It's the cities of Atwater, Livingston, and Merced, the communities of La Grande, Planada, Winton Water Sanitary District, and the Merced Irrigation District. We're about 160,000 acres in total. About 130,000 acres are in agriculture, and the other 30,000 are urban. The Merced Irrigation District gets its surface water supplies from the Merced River, originating in Yosemite National Park, which is always pretty fun and interesting. Merced Irrigation District operates the Lake McClure with the new extractor dam, total storage capacity of about 1 million acre feet, and we divert off the Merced River to provide surface water to growers. Essentially, all drinking water supplies are from groundwater in our area. California Sustainable Groundwater Management Act requires GSAs to manage to avoid certain undesirable results. Most of those are primarily driven by groundwater levels, but it's looking at things like impacts to domestic wells, infrastructure impacts from subsidence, water quality impacts, and others. So with most of the domestic wells being located in our area, we do have subsidence in the Merced Groundwater Subbasin. It's considered a critically overdrafted subbasin by the state. There's a lot of urgency and a need to really move forward to manage our groundwater supplies. After the initial submittal of the Merced Groundwater Subbasin GSP in 2020, the Merced Irrigation Urban GSA Board quickly move forward in developing policies in order to manage groundwater within our area. One of the interesting pieces is that we share this plan with the overall basin, but we are responsible for managing in our area only. We have our own policies, our own rules and regulations, and the other GSAs, even though they're in the same subbasin, will have their own separate policies and rules. There's always some overlap and collaboration that happens, but really we are responsible for our own boundaries in groundwater pumping within our own area. So between 2021 and 2022, we set forth and worked with stakeholders and did a lot of technical work to come up with initial policies. And then right after that, some of those policies that went into effect were a well registration requirement for all wells within the GSA. We had certain timelines for certain wells first. So, for example, agricultural wells surveying greater than 10 acres they had to register their wells sooner than others. And in addition to that, the board also adopted a groundwater allocation that spanned multiple years and was set at the sustainable yield for the subbasin. And so we've been implementing those over the past few years, and I've been learning a lot. But there's a lot of pieces that move with it, being data collection. There's a lot of number crunching. There's a lot of uncertainty, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to balance really three principles, which is long-term groundwater sustainability, flexibility for both growers and urban water providers, any groundwater user in the basin, and also protecting local water rights.
Thank you, Matt. All of that sounds really interesting. The three principles you mentioned at the very end especially resonate with me: sustainability, flexibility, protection of water rights. They sound like very important key aspects in groundwater management, but I imagine that balancing them is not easy, and it's likely that you're facing quite a few challenges doing that. So let's talk a little bit more about groundwater resources and the challenges facing their sustainable management today. So to Matt, what do you see as the most significant challenges as Merced Subbasin works to move into this sustainable groundwater management? And then also to Jim, I would love to hear from you now. Also, you're a consultant working on groundwater issues in multiple states. So it would be great to hear your perspective about sustainable groundwater management challenges and maybe also how they differ or are similar across different contexts.
One of the greatest challenges is that SGMA, even though it requires 20 years to become sustainable, you have to make forward progress before then. And so you're balancing it's a timing issue with a data issue, being that we have to change what we're doing today, but you don't always know if you're making the right decisions. You don't know if you have quite enough data, but ultimately you have to make a decision. And so be able to balance all of those, have some confidence in what you're doing and being able to make decisions and know that you're doing the right thing. In our area, as I mentioned earlier, we do have access to robust surface water supply. Most of the agricultural ground within our area does use and receive surface water on a regular basis. There is some ground that only uses groundwater. But again, all drinking water supplies are provided through groundwater. And so when we experience long-term droughts, or if folks decided to just stop taking surface water and wanted to start using groundwater, there are significant impacts that occur or could occur. And, really groundwater is I call it a long-term safety net in the sense that you use the surface water when it's available and you use the groundwater when surface water is not available. So, we did witness decades and decades and decades ago, when a drought occurred, we would see some groundwater decline. People would turn on their wells, they'd pump more water. But typically after the drought, you'd see substantial recovery. Sometimes it would fully recover. Sometimes it would, mostly recover, but you'd see substantial recovery. And then in the last, probably 20 years or so, especially, when a drought would come, you'd see the declines and you'd see almost no recovery at all. You'd see stabilization, but not really recovery. And this isn't unique to the Merced Groundwater Subbasin. This is something that's occurred throughout the entire Central Valley of California. But, again, the lack of recovery after droughts really prompted the need for Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in California. And then the other hard part is that, even if you had all the data, even if you have all the tools that you need, you have to figure out policy and you have to build trust. And so in order to sustainably manage groundwater practically, we have to have robust rules, trust, and have to make difficult decisions. And to top it all off, this is especially challenging when people haven't had to look at how much groundwater they use for over 100 years in California. There's been a lot of development in the last couple of decades, but there are a lot of people that have been pumping for a very long time too.
Well, and for me, I came to Nebraska in 2006 and have been working in water management in and around Nebraska for a long time, especially in the agricultural environment that we have in the Great Plains, which is row crops, primarily corn and soybeans with some other lower consumption crops like wheat thrown in. And so in Nebraska, when a grower faced a cut, it was usually a moderate cut because we're kind of ramping down over time. So they could mix in a lower water use crop in one or more years to meet those challenges. Going to California and seeing all the permanent crops really gave me pause, especially when I got there in 2021 to do the first stakeholder meeting for Miagusa. And you see a lot of nut trees that have just been planted, and they are not going to produce a crop for probably 7 years. And those farmers may not have even realized that they were about to start getting cut in terms of how much water they were going to be able to use. And really the only reason for that is SGMA has really, really aggressive timelines. So even with the best communication plan in the world, you're not going to reach everyone and get that information to them, especially when you don't always know exactly where you're going at every point in time because it's all being figured out. So with the significantly steep cuts in allowable water use, the fact that so many of the fields are already planted with perennial crops, those two things kind of combined create a really tough situation. And it kind of goes back to Matt's comment on flexibility. Farmers need to be able to move water around. And with 250 Groundwater Sustainability Agencies, in fact, 3 in the Merced subbasin alone, it's difficult to figure out transfer and other policies for how farmers can move water around within your own GSP, much less how they can move that water around between Groundwater Sustainability Agencies. So that's really been eye-opening for me. And as I've worked with Matt over the last 5 years, I keep having to remind myself that these farmers are in a different situation than what we typically experience in Nebraska.
Thank you both. All of this sounds really complex. I think, Matt, you mentioned the importance of building trust. And I think I couldn't agree more that gaining trust of farmers and water managers and policymakers is very important. It's not a simple process in my experience. It takes a lot of time. And I think trust is also key when working with partners, right? So, and my understanding is that your two entities have been working collaboratively for some time now to solve these real problems related to water management in California. Can you talk a little bit about this process, how it has been beneficial, and also how does Nebraska come into play? Whoever would like to start.
Well, Olson and Miagusa started working together in 2021. I think it's actually kind of a funny story how we found Olson, but and so I'll have to jog my memory a little bit. I don't remember if it was a webcast where we couldn't comment, it was listen only, or if maybe I had 2 meetings going at once and I was listening to the webinar or something like that. But I was watching some kind of a webinar or something, on the groundwater accounting platform, which is an open source accounting platform. At the time was funded by DWR and USBR and had a few folks involved in it. Maybe we'll fill in some gaps here, Jim, but we came across a portion of the presentation where Jim Shiner was presenting on a tool within the groundwater accounting platform, one of the modules. And we heard, the accounting platform itself was interesting. I liked the module. There was very interested in that piece. But as we watched it, we were thinking about the fact that here was someone who came from an area that has been managing groundwater for a long time. They have existing programs, and maybe we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Maybe we try to work with these Olson folks and piggyback on their experience and I mean more than just Olson's experience, but the experience of Nebraska and other states that have existing groundwater management programs. And not to copy them one for one, but where can we take the wins? How can we avoid the losses? How can we tailor it to our area? But again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel entirely. Yeah,
and I would say, we came out to facilitate a stakeholder process once Miagusa's groundwater sustainability plan was approved. They were moving very aggressively to implement it. I recognized as I was coming in, I had some expertise to bring and some great experience, but I was also an unknown. And so it was definitely a process of working with the stakeholders and showing them that we had something to offer, and weren't, that we could bring our experience from Nebraska to bear, and show some examples of allocation programs that have been successful. It was pretty striking to me that the first meeting, I presented two different alternatives. One was from California, in the Kern County area, and the other was from Nebraska. And they had absolutely no interest in what their neighbors were doing down in Kern County. And they were very, very interested in the different aspects of allocation programs that exist in Nebraska. So as I was able to kind of lay out the different recipes for allocations, which include things like multi-year allocations, the ability to pool your allocation amongst various fields, the ability to transfer or trade, whatever you want to call it. And it was really great to see all of the stakeholders really engaged, wanting to learn about how to make an allocation program that could work for the growers. And that's really where we ended up at the end of it. And I felt, just through 4 or 5 meetings, a huge transformation in kind of the feel. It wasn't about let's sit down and talk about how bad this is going to be. It was about let's lay this out in the best way that we can to provide as much flexibility as possible to the growers.
Great, thank you. Let's talk more about groundwater modeling. So groundwater modeling has historically been a slow process. Can you explain the bottleneck associated with that process that has existed in the past, and how Olson has sought to address it and allow for faster decision-making by water managers?
I can go ahead and start there. When I got to Nebraska in 2006, we had an interstate water issue over the Republican River Basin, and it involved the groundwater model, very difficult to understand or communicate, given the technology at the time, and also very difficult to just get model runs completed. It would often take trained professionals weeks to accomplish what seemed like they should be relatively simple tasks. They just weren't, and it's because these models are so esoteric in nature. They're essentially a numerical representation of the real world. And if you think about having to define lots of properties of the aquifer and the hydrologically connected streams, it just becomes very complicated. And when we didn't have some of the tools that we have today to allow us to get modeling done more quickly and to be able to show visualizations of the results, it really could feel to a grower like we were just making it all up. We come to the meeting that month, we hear what they want to say, we go back to the office for a month, come back out, give them some answers, but they don't know where it came from. So when I came over to Olson in 2015, after working for the state of Nebraska for 10 years, I really wanted to find ways to bring solutions to water managers. And not just the same old, we can run the model for you, and give you a report, but develop tools, that really, put them in the driver's seat. And so eventually we ended up developing in 2017, the Groundwater Evaluation Toolbox, which automates the process of running these groundwater models so that a groundwater manager can ask a simple question, such as, what will happen if I permit this new well? Well, okay, the groundwater manager doesn't know how to run the model, but he does know how much water use, how many acres they want to water, those types of things that they can enter into an interface, and then let the tool do the work of converting that into the computer files that are needed to run that new simulation, take the output, compare it against the baseline simulation, and give you some actual information in literally minutes instead of months. And so that's been really transformational. Matt mentioned the groundwater accounting platform earlier. That was kind of just taking off right around 2017, 2018 as well. And we ran into a company now called Environmental Science Associates when we were out in Kern County to talk about our groundwater evaluation toolbox. And the two have kind of grown together. And we now have what we call the GET engine, which has now been open sourced to complement the groundwater accounting platform through its scenario planning module. And just to follow on that, but in 2022, we were able to launch a big project funded by the Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation, in cooperation with the California Water Data Consortium and the Environmental Defense Fund, to really advance both of those tools. And Matt and Mia Gusa, they were a pilot within that project. It's been incredibly successful. I can't imagine how Sigma could have been implemented in the way that it's written, even 10 years earlier, because the tools just weren't there and the technology wasn't there. And so that's really, I think, been what's been really remarkable, is seeing all of that develop and be able to keep pace with that really aggressive timeline.
Yeah, to piggyback on the groundwater accounting platform, especially, again, Miyagusa, we did join as a pilot partner. All of our groundwater accounting work is being performed in the groundwater accounting platform today. So over the 160,000 acres, we have tens of thousands of parcels that are included in the groundwater accounting platform. We are importing ET data from OpenET. We're monitoring groundwater extraction, calculating groundwater extraction through the groundwater accounting platform, managing the allocation in the accounting platform. There's another module in the accounting platform that there's a module within the groundwater accounting platform for groundwater level monitoring networks. You get at other stations and other monitoring sites. And so essentially all of our data is being stored and managed in this one platform. One of the other pieces that I really love about it, I guess a few things, but one of them is that it helps us as the groundwater managers, but then also there's access for the growers to log in. There's a novel piece to it, which is that they see a map of their parcels within the account. They can see their balances and how much they've used in practically real time. There's still a lot of progress being made to get it fully there. Um, but it puts the data in the growers' hands. It makes it accessible and easy for the managers to use. And from a modeling perspective, we've been very fortunate in the Merced Subbasin. We have a well-developed model. It started developing it years and years ago. I constantly am saying that, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. This isn't something that I did. It's just something that I get to carry forward as staff for the GSA. The board and member agencies have been they've been visionaries and they've been very proactive on these things. But at some point, I started realizing that for all the data that we manage within the groundwater accounting platform, I have to report effectively all of these values to someone to run the model and generate what we call an annual report. We have to submit to the state every single year. And at some point, I realized, well, if all my data is here and I have all my monitoring network here, and there's a module with the groundwater accounting platform where you can run the model, everything is so darn close that it makes sense to really leverage all of those pieces and make them work well together, and streamline what we're able to do, and be able to focus more on the managing part, the people part, the communication part, rather than having to spend all of our time specifically on data and analysis. So a lot of that is still under development. It's in progress. But it's amazing that there's a path forward to be able to accomplish these things.
Great. Next, I'd like to touch on the weather a little bit, which is becoming more and more unpredictable. So we're seeing more weather whiplash in both California and Nebraska, and of course other regions as well. Extremely wet events followed by deep droughts. How does your groundwater accounting platform help the Merced Subbasin, or in Nebraska, natural resources districts and its growers adapt under these conditions?
I might start and just say we do have a version of the groundwater accounting platform implemented in Nebraska. It's in the Twin Platte Natural Resources District, and it is collecting an enormous amount of data on pumping and evapotranspiration, precipitation in real time for every producer's field. So there's 325,000 acres in the Twin Platte NRD, about, I think, 2,000 wells, and those are all being monitored in real time. And the producers can see all of this data. The staff at the NRD can sit down with the producers and walk through the data. And, they know that there's dry years where they're using a lot of data. They know there's dry years where they're using a lot of water. But in the past, they didn't really know how much the regulators thought they were using. And so when you have something like the groundwater accounting platform, it's very transparent, so that the regulators or the managers can track water use, and the growers can see the same information that the managers are seeing. It's just incredibly important, and they can see in the dry years, okay, I used a lot of water, but in the wet years, I didn't really use that much water, and everyone's in agreement on that.
Yeah, I think even though we're states apart, there's a lot of overlap in the needs for growers, and so everything that Jim talked about, the functionality and the opportunities that come with the groundwater accounting platform to manage water, those are all true in California too. One of the things that I like to keep in mind is that long-term sustainability is really only possible if people trust the numbers. And for a grower to be able to log into the platform and see their numbers right there is pretty remarkable. And you still end up having conversations and sitting down and meeting with growers too to talk about it. But it's not time lost. Every meeting is valuable, and there's something to learn from every one of those opportunities. One of the things that we're doing is the new USA board has adopted flow meter requirements on wells. This is not, wells were not necessarily required to have flow meters in California And even today, it's really up to GSAs to require it and to enforce it if they want to. So, earlier in the podcast when I talked about the need to balance timing with real actions, the MUGUSA has this approach where we're using OpenET and accounting for how much rain occurred and how much surface water was applied to try to back out how much groundwater was extracted, and at the same time moving toward having flow meters in place. Well, that calculation process is extremely challenging. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of assumptions that go into play. But at the very basic part of it, if a grower is able to log in and they could see their fields on a map and they could look at the numbers that play into the end calculation, then at least you had a really good starting point to have that conversation and to learn from them. Oh, I should probably also say, in the context of weather whiplash, one of the things that I try to keep in mind is that when we have wet years, there's a lot of opportunity to use more surface water and really reduce how much groundwater we can use. It can be a large impact from a volumetric standpoint. However, in dry years, you're likely going to use more groundwater, but small differences could have a large impact. And, when I try to think about it from the context of weather whiplash and dry years, for our growers to be able to track their allocations, to really manage how much they're pumping, whether it's a wet year or dry year, but really try to keep that as low as they can. So that way, when the dry years do occur, where they don't have surface water available, that they have sufficient groundwater in their groundwater account in order for them to maintain that sustainability and be able to continue their operations.
And my last question is to Matt. And since this is the Water for Food podcast, ultimately, how does technology protect the economic viability of the Merced region's multi-billion-dollar agricultural industry?
Well, I think, at the end of the day, better data leads to better decisions, which leads to more stable water supply for everyone. There's a lot of work that has been done to improve data and technology in California. Like Jim mentioned, 10 years ago, we didn't have a groundwater accounting platform. In fact, there were effectively 0 groundwater accounting platforms that existed. There's some private and there's other similar accounting platforms that do exist, but those didn't exist 10 years ago. And we've seen things like INSAR data being collected. You have OpenET providing open source evapotranspiration data for, is it the entire U.S. now, Jim? Between the work of the groundwater accounting platform, installing additional weather sensors, we've also been doing a lot of work within the Merced groundwater subbasin to install more monitoring wells where we're monitoring and tracking groundwater levels. And when we do that, we install telemetry equipment, pressure transducers to be able to track the groundwater level changes in real time. All of those tools are coming together in order to inform the policies that the GSA board considers for adoption. And the intent of all of the data collection is to allow folks to continue doing what they're doing in a sustainable way. Together with both of the tools, the groundwater accounting platform and the additional monitoring locations, whether it's just purely environmental data or groundwater level data, we are using those to better understand how much water is being used and how the aquifer responds over time, and how we can look at that to monitor for potential impacts to domestic wells. We could see how it how subsidence trends may be aligning or not. And I think really, that's the spirit of Groundwater Awareness Week, trying to tie it back a little bit, is that, if we can, between the groundwater accounting platform, having a transparent accounting platform, having additional monitoring wells and data that's coming in real time, being able to display it in a transparent way. We want growers in the community to be able to see the resource clearly so we can protect it for the long term.
Thank you so much, Matt and Jim, for the insights that you shared in today's podcast. It's been a pleasure having you on. And that concludes this episode of the Water for Food podcast. We'll include a link to some additional materials in our show notes, so be sure to check those out. And join us next time for another insightful conversation on the critical issues of water and food security.
Thanks for joining us this time on the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Make sure to visit our website, waterforfood.nebraska.edu, to view show notes or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.